Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Diggs, and it's another beautiful day out here in the Pacific Northwest. Today, we're going to go over everything you need to know about elemental chaining in Genshin Impact. For this video, we will be referring to this elemental chaining chart as I break down each one individually. To keep it simple, we're just going to be going over the fundamentals of the reactions and save comboing for another time. So let's start with Swirl. The main thing to remember with Swirl is that it's triggered by a Nemos, or wind. When you use a Nemos on either Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro, it will deal extra elemental damage of that element and also spread the element to nearby monsters. Let's go put it to practice. Since using an Nemos on a Pyro affected mob will spread Pyro and also do Pyro damage, you'll notice the immune text come up. This is because Pyro slimes don't take Pyro damage. You can also see here the Hill Churl picking up Pyros due to the spread. In this Hydro Swirl example, you can see the Hill Churls taking the additional Hydro damage as they aren't immune. And back again to Cryo Slimes, absorbing the additional Cryo Swirl damage. Keep in mind, you cannot put a Nemos on a monster first. The monster must already be affected by an element. Next is Crystallize, which occurs when you use Geo on any of the elements below, similar to Swirl. When you use a Geo skill on an elementally affected mob, it will drop an elemental shard that you can pick up to provide a shield to reduce incoming damage. Here, we drop a Geo skill onto these Cryo Slimes. Notice the elemental shards that drop in the area. Since it's a Cryo shield, Cryo damage is absorbed. These Hill Churls are shooting Electro arrows, so let's put some Electro on them and then drop a Geo skill to create an Electro shard. Now we can absorb some damage. Like in Nemos, you can't put Geo onto a mob first, so be sure to afflict the mob with the type of shield you're trying to get first. It's also important to note that even if you have a shield, it's still possible to be affected by the status ailments associated with that element. This is due to shields only negating damage. So if you're wet with a Cryo shield, you can still freeze if you get affected by Cryo. We're going to save burning for the end since it's a little different in the current state of the game. First, we'll talk about Electro-related elemental reactions, since the order that they're triggered doesn't really matter, as opposed to the outer layer of this chart, where the elemental order does matter. The first reaction is Electro Charged, which occurs between Electro and Hydro. When you trigger Electro Charge, you deal chain damage and have an additional tick of Electro damage. You'll notice in this example that Electro on its own doesn't do multiple hits, but when you trigger Electro Charge, there is a chain reaction and also an additional hit of Electro damage. Here's Barbara triggering Electro Charged. Notice the purple damage text to indicate that it's additional Electro damage, so be mindful if using this reaction if they have Electro resistance. Then we have Superconduct, a reaction between Electro and Cryo. When Superconduct is triggered, it causes additional AoE Cryo damage. You can see the Cryo damage here when we trigger Superconduct on these Hill Churls. But watch when we trigger it on these Ice Slimes. You'll notice the immune text. This is because Ice Slimes aren't affected by the Cryo damage triggered by Superconduct. Keep this in mind for deciding which elements you want to chain. Finally, we have Overload, which is triggered between Electro and Pyro. When you trigger Overload, you can expect to see AoE Pyro damage. In this example, you can see the additional damage from Overload indicated as pink text. As you would expect, Pyro Slimes are immune to this additional damage. Now, we're going to move on to elemental reactions that are affected by the order of how you trigger them. These reactions are Vaporize, Melt, and Frozen. We'll start with Vaporize. Vaporize is an elemental reaction between Pyro and Hydro. If you proc Vaporize with Hydro, then you will do 2 times Hydro damage. If you proc Vaporize with Pyro, you'll do 1.5x Pyro damage. A simple way to remember which one does more damage is thinking that you typically put fire out with water. So a Hydro Vaporize will do more, but you don't put water out with fire, so a Pyro Vaporize does less in comparison. Let's check out the example. First, we'll see how much damage Barbara does. Looks like she did around 23 damage and around 37 to 40 for crits. Now let's put some Pyro on this guy to test. Proc it with a Hydro attack, and there's a Hydro damage Vaporize with a 2.x modifier. Now, let's see how much damage Amber does. She critted for 232 and 155 regular. Since we know a Pyro Vaporize is only a 1.5 damage multiplier, we should see either 232 damage or 348 Pyro damage if it crits. Next is Melt. Melt is an elemental reaction which occurs between Pyro and Cryo. Just like Vaporize, the order of which the element you use matters. If you proc Melt with Pyro, then you will deal a 2 times Pyro damage. If you proc Melt with Cryo, then you will deal a 1.5 Cryo damage. Again, a simple way to remember this is that you would typically melt ice with fire, so using Pyro to trigger Melt will do more damage, as opposed to saying you're going to melt fire with ice, in which proccing Melt with Cryo will have a lower modifier. Let's take a look at a Pyro triggered Melt. We can see that Amber is doing 232 crit Pyro damage, so we can expect to see double that damage when we trigger Melt. Now, we'll take a look at a Cryo triggered Melt. First, we take a look at Kaya's default damage. Looks like 162 Cryo damage. So a 1.5x modifier should make it 243. It looks like both cases ended up as we expected. And finally, Frozen, which occurs between Hydro and Cryo. When Frozen is triggered, well, they get frozen. When a mob is frozen, you can trigger an effect called Shatter. This effect occurs by hitting a frozen unit with a heavy attack from Claymore units like Razor or Noelle. This effect does not have a text visual for some reason. You will also know you've triggered Shatter as it does an additional hit at the same time. At first, we thought the order mattered for Shatter due to our experiment here. First, we'll show a two-handed attack using Razor so that we can compare. Then, we'll wet him with Barbara, followed by a freeze from Kaya. Notice that hitting him unfreezes him, but doesn't cause additional damage or shatter. We repeated the process to double check. Next, we'll do the opposite. We place a cryo effect on, and then freeze with a hydro attack. The ice shatters and we get an additional damage tick. We repeated this as well, and it felt pretty consistent. But we found shatter can occur with either combination. It could potentially be timing based due to these examples, but those have also proven inconsistent. To be honest, with how shatter works at the moment, it feels a little odd, and because there's no visual effect, it might very well be a bug, but we wanted to include it here anyway. Lastly, we have Burn, an elemental reaction between Pyro and Dendry. When Burn is triggered, the target is subject to Pyro damage over time, or DOT. There aren't too many opportunities to burn currently outside of some monsters, like the ones you see here. Maybe we'll see a Dendry unit in the future. That basically wraps up all the fundamentals of elemental reactions. Hope you enjoyed this video, everyone. It's a lot of information and can be confusing, but I hope this video will be a good resource to help you practice and understand it a little better. If this video helped you, please remember to share it with your other Genshin Impact friends. Also, let us know in the comments what other Genshin Impact content you guys might want to see. And of course, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys next time!